So let us start with today's lesson of pollination and fertilization. Now, what are the learning objectives of today's lesson? Now, today we should first learn about what is pollination. We will also learn about the types of pollination, and we will also learn the advantages and the disadvantages of the self-pollination and cross-pollination. And we will learn the differences between the self and cross-pollination. Now, first we are learning about the pollination definition. Second, we are learning about the advantages as well as the disadvantages. We will also learn about the disadvantages of cross-pollination and self-pollination. We will learn about the differences of self and cross-pollination. Now let us start with the... Now in this slide, we are going to discuss about what is pollination. Now pollination is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma, and this can happen mainly in three ways. Now let us first discuss what is anther and stigma. So we all know that anther is the male part where the pollen grains are produced, and it is carried to the female part or the stigma. So this is the female part. So pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the male part to the female part or the stigma of the flower. Now as this happens in three ways, we are going to just go into brief description of the three ways. Now the first way is the autogamy. So what is autogamy? There the pollen may be transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. Okay, so what is happening? It is being transferred from the anther and to the stigma of the same flower. So keep it in mind, it is being transferred from anther to the stigma of the same flower. That is autogamy. Now geitonogamy, what is geitonogamy? That is the pollen of another flower may fall on the stigma of different flower of the same plant. So the plant is same but the flowers are different. Previously it was the same flower. Now here geitonogamy, it is the same plant but the flowers are different. So the pollen is falling from another flower to the stigma of one different flower. So this is called geitonogamy. And what is allogamy? Allogamy is the pollen of the flower may fall on the stigma of a flower of another plant. So like side by side might be two plants are there, or two plants of the same species are located in a nearby region. So from one flower the pollen is being transferred to another flower by several agents of pollination. That we will learn gradually, not in this video. In the next video we'll also learn about the agents of pollination. So the pollens are transferred either by wind or by insects or by animals from one flower to another flower of different plants of the same species. Now pollination is a thing which is a specific thing which is happening within the same species. Now the pollen grain of a rose plant cannot be carried to a stigma of a marigold or a sunflower. So it should happen between two rose plants or two marigold or two whatever you can say, sunflower. So whatever flower is that, it should be a plant of the same species. So allogamy is the pollen grains are carried from one flower to from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same species. Just keep in mind, three types of pollination we are just discussing about here: autogamy, geitonogamy and allogamy. So one is within the same flower from anther to stigma. Second one, geitonogamy, is from in the same plant from one flower to another flower. And the third one is allogamy. It happens in two different plants of the same species. So I think this part is clear to you all. Now let us move on to the next one. And dear children, every time I am telling you, please go through the previous slides of the flower, its structure and functions. Otherwise, this lesson will not be clear to you all. Okay, is it clear? Just go through the previous lessons. Now two types of pollination. First one is self-pollination. Second one is cross-pollination. So these we will learn these two in details with the advantages, disadvantages and all. Now in this slide, what is self-pollination? Now this transfer of the pollen grains from the anther, these pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the same flower. The flower is the same. So this, as previously we have told, autogamy. So this is autogamy, or the stigma of another flower of the same plant is also known as self-pollination. So when does the self-pollination occur? Now this, when it is happening in this same flower, this is called autogamy. Now when geitonogamy also, this category also falls under self-pollination, because within the same plant itself, from the one flower, if it is falling to the same plant only in different flower, so it is also a stigma of another flower also, it's correct, it is also self-pollination. So it may fall in the same flower or in the another flower of the same plant. These both are self-pollination. Now there is a question in our mind that when does this self-pollination occur? This occurs when the plant is having bisexual flower, that is having both male and female characters, or sex organs, and unisexual flowers. So both in bisexual and both in unisexual flower, this self-pollination occurs. So is it clear? The pollen grains from the anther are shifted to the stigma of the same flower or to the another flower of the same plant. Now when does this occur? This occurs only in plants which are having unisexual or bisexual flowers, having both male and female organs. Now let us see what is there in the next slide. Now advantages of self-pollination, we should know that why this self-pollination, how it is helping us. Now it is mainly very easy, and it is most likely to occur in the stamens and carpels, which all are maturing at the same time. Now what is happening in self-pollination? All the parental features are same, they are all preserved. Now how the previous the parent and plant look like, the flowers look like, here the flowers will be like same like the parents only. So preserves the parental character indefinitely. So it is clear, it is easy. The parental characters are preserved indefinitely, and very small amount of pollen is required, as it is not happening through different like it is not being carried from one plant to another plant. It is happening within the same plant only. So the requirement of the pollen is very less. So small quantity of pollen is only sufficient, and thus it is economical. Flowers need not produce nectar, they need not attract any agents of pollination. So neither nectar nor scent are very essential, and they need not be very showy. So the flower need not be very colorful, the flower need not be very showy, so that the insect should get attracted, come on it, sit on it by its smell, by its colorful bright petals, not like that. So it's what? It's just a simple process, it's economical, it's having they need to produce very less pollen grains, and they do not depend on the pollinating agents. They should not depend on the pollinating agents, as it is happening within the same plant, within the same flower. They are not dependent on the pollinating agent. So as they are not dependent on pollinating agents, no use, no need to produce nectar, no need to produce scent, they need not be showing. So it is a very simple process, self-pollination. But there are many disadvantages of self-pollination also. So what are the disadvantages of self-pollination? Now mainly the first disadvantage is it is leading to the loss of vigor and vitality. So vigor and vitality is lost. Now repeated self-pollination, what is it doing? It is producing poor quality seeds, and very weak offsprings are produced by repeated self-pollination, and the genetic defects of the plants are not getting corrected. Now might be some genetic defect in the previous flower or the plant was there. So when it comes to the next generation also, the same defect is being carried on as the genetic material. It is remaining within the same plant, within the same plant, it is not corrected. If cross-pollination would have happened, then it would have been corrected. Now here there is no chance of correction or elimination, so it's there. And new varieties cannot be obtained in self-pollination. In self-pollination, the seeds gradually will reduce their quality. It will be poor quality seeds. They will lose their vigor and vitality. The genetic defects, they are not eliminated. The genetic defects are not eliminated. and new varieties cannot be obtained in self-pollination. So as there are advantages, there are several disadvantages also. So let us see what are the advantages and disadvantages of cross-pollination. First, we should learn what is cross-pollination, then we will move on to those. Now let us move on to the next slide. Now, first we should know this also, that how are flowers adapted to self-pollination. Now this is very brief. This you are going to study in 12th standard. So this is not for 9th. You just go through it, that homogamy, when this happens, when the anther and the stigma, they mature at the same time. Mainly this happens in rice and wheat. So the anther and the stigma of the flowers are maturing at the same time. This is called homogamy. And what is the next one? It is called cleistogamy. What is that? Now cleisto means close and gamon means marriage. Now some bisexual flowers, they remain closed all throughout their life so that the pollen can easily pollinate the stigma of the same flower. Like Commelina species which remain underground, you can see this type of flowers which remain closed throughout the life so that the pollen should be within the flower only, and they will fall within the flower and they will pollinate the stigma. So thus the pollination happens within the plant only. So this is called cleistogamy, and this in details you are going to study in higher classes like 12th standard. So here just you remember, it's for your knowledge, that how are the flowers adapted for self-pollination. If just a question comes, you can say that there are two ways. One, the anther and the stigma, they mature at the same time, that is called homogamy, and another is the cleistogamy, when the pollens are, or the bisexual flowers, they remain closed so that the pollen can easily pollinate the stigma of the flower. And one example for just knowledge, you can learn Commelina. So this is the picture of the flower, and for your knowledge, just you go through it once. So no harm in gaining more knowledge, right? So we will move on to cross-pollination now. Now what is cross-pollination? Now here in this, the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma of flower of another plant of the same species. So you can see here two flowers are there. The pollen is being carried by any agent. Like here we have seen that bee was sitting in this flower first, then it came and sat in this flower. The bee's whole body is covered with pollen grains. So this yellowish dots you can see here, these are all pollen grains which are stuck here, and when the bee comes and sit in this flower, this pollen grains get stuck to the stigma. Now like this only the pollination is happening, and this is called cross-pollination. So transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of different plant of the same species, obviously. So this is the importance of pollination, cross-pollination, and this will only happen in presence of several pollinating agents that we will be learning in the next class. Now we will move on to the agents of cross-pollination. Now, what is the advantages of cross-pollination? Now, seeds produced, they contain actually, in this type of pollination, they have another source of genetic material which may contain genes which are advantageous for the survival of the seedling. Now, in the previous one, we have seen that the quality of the seeds, the seedlings was reducing generation after generation. But here we can see that seeds produced contain another source of genetic material, as it is happening within the two plants. So the genetic materials within the two plants, they vary, and they may contain genes which are advantageous for the survival of the seedlings. So we can see that they produce healthier offsprings, and the seeds they are actually viable and they are healthier and having better germinating capacity. Now we can say that the intermixing of the genetic makeup of the two plants, they cause variation of the offsprings. So there is variation. There are healthy offsprings are being produced. What we can say that the genetic material is advantageous for the survival of the seedling. So these are the advantages of cross-pollination. Now what are the disadvantages of cross-pollination? Now here also the pollination is very much uncertain, as the plants have to depend on the external agents for pollination. Now external agents, what? Like wind, like insects, like animals. So external agents like wind, insects and animals, we will learn afterwards. So this external agents, they have to depend on the external agents. Now pollen grains have to be produced in larger amounts. A lot of pollen grains is wasted in this type of process by, if they are carried by wind also, if they are carried by animals or insects also, it will be wasted. A huge amount of pollens is wasted. Now this process is not economical because the flowers have to adapt themselves to attract the pollinating agents. Now they have to be very colorful, they have to produce nectar, they have to produce scent because they need to attract the pollinating agents. So it's not at all an economical process. Previously the self-pollination was an economical process, and in cross-pollination they may lead to poor quality seeds. So this is while learning about the advantages and disadvantages, you can learn about the differences of cross-pollination and self-pollination. Now is it clear to everyone? Now please go through the previous sites, the videos also, where I have discussed about the flower and its structures, so that this lesson is clear to you all, and I have given the link in my description box as well as in the above also in the I. You can click and see the previous links also. Now let us move on to the difference between self-pollination and cross-pollination. Now depending on the occurrence, actually we have already spoken a lot about the differences of self and cross-pollination. Now if we are depending on the characteristics of occurrence, so we can say that self-pollination occurs within the same flower or between the two flowers of the same plant. But cross-pollination, it will be occurring between the two flowers or two different plants of the same species. Agents of pollination. In self-pollination, no agents are required. In cross-pollination, yeah, external agents like wind, water, insects, birds and animals are obviously required. Now, depending on the production of the pollen grains, how? Now, here we can say that in self-pollination, very small pollen is wasted. But in cross-pollination, huge amount of pollen is wasted in the method of shifting from one plant to another. So wasting of pollens is more. Now on the appearance of the flowers, we can say that flowers are not usually attractive in self-pollination, but in cross-pollination, the petals, the flowers have to be very attractive. They have to produce nectar. They have to be very showy. This point also I have covered here. Fragrance and nectar, they are not necessary in self-pollination, but they are obviously necessary in cross-pollination. Now last but not the least is the nature of the offsprings. The nature of the offsprings produced have a genetic makeup which is identical to the parents in the self-pollination, but offsprings produced in cross-pollination, they may differ in genetic makeup and the variations occur a lot. Okay, is it clear? So depending on this 6 points, you just remember the 6 points. Depending on the 6 points, as we have learned earlier in all the disadvantages and advantages of self and cross-pollination, you will make it very clear then. And here you are just remembering this occurrence, agent of pollination, production of pollen grains, appearance of the flowers, fragrance and nectar, nature of the offsprings. On this only you will be differentiating both the self and cross-pollination. So I think till now it is clear to everyone. So try to memorize this 6 points only to differentiate between cross and self-pollination, and just go through the whole video properly so that you can understand what all is happening in the self and cross-pollination. Now in the next video I will be coming with the agents of pollination. So till then, just go through the previous lesson, flowers and its structure, and this pollination first part. And please do subscribe to my channel if you have not yet subscribed, to get my updates on the regular basis. Thank you.